From the studios of Blackwater Media in the great city of Atlanta, I'm Dr. William Lester, and I'd like to welcome you to a very special program for everyone to enjoy. Prepare for a very special collection of stories of full moon fever, howls, fangs, and claws. So lock your doors, get your silver bullets ready, and prepare for Werewolf Weekend. She snapped awake out of a deep sleep, screaming aloud in terror. In her nightmare, a large, white wolf had been chasing her around and around the house, gaining on her with every step until it finally pounced on her and ripped out her throat. She lay shaking for hours, unable to sleep after such a terrifying dream. But morning finally arrived, and the day was completely normal. Celia forgot all about her dream, until the moment her parents reminded her that they would be going out that night to celebrate their anniversary. Celia turned milk white. In her dream, the white wolf had come to kill her while her parents were out celebrating their anniversary. She started shaking and begging them not to go. Her parents were astonished at her behavior and finally shamed her into staying home alone that night. Fearfully, Celia locked herself into the house as soon as her parents left, checking every door and every window. She tried to laugh it off as she got into bed, and finally she shook off her irrational fear and fell asleep. Celia snapped awake suddenly, every muscle tense. She heard the tinkling of falling glass from a broken window and the snuffling sound of a snout pressed to the floor. It was the sound of a hunting wolf. A werewolf. Real wolves did not break into houses when there was plenty of game outside. She could hear the click-clacking of the creature's claws on the wooden floor. The musky, foul smell of wet animal fur combined with the meaty breath of the carnivore drifted into the room. She could hear the werewolves panting right outside her bedroom. Then her body was out of bed and she sped through the bathroom and down the back stairs. She heard a soft growl and then the sound of animal feet pursuing her as she raced down the steps and tore open the back door. A glance at the window beside her showed a reflection of the werewolf leaping down the last few steps behind her. Celia's feet screamed in protest as she ran painfully across the sharp gravel driveway toward the tool shed with its shovels and baseball bats. Anything she could use as a weapon. But the huge red-eyed wolf was suddenly between her and the tool shed, stalking toward her. The cold wind pierced her skin as she turned and fled around the side of the house. She gasped as the white wolf howled and took off after her. She could hear the terrifying sound of the creature's pounding feet. Faster, faster she commanded her legs, panting desperately against the fear choking her. She would run around the house and back down the driveway, she thought, with the clarity of sheer horror. She felt the wolf snap at her back leg and felt the sting of teeth. She put on speed. The wolf veered away from her suddenly, and she felt a rush of hope. She couldn't hear the wolf now, couldn't see it in the cloud-darkened night. She kept running around the house, heading back toward the tool shed. To her intense relief, she heard the sound of a car coming down the road in front of her house. Her parents were back and would save her from the wolf. Then her heart stopped in panic as she turned the last corner and saw the shape of the white wolf as it stood balanced on the porch railing right in front of her. It sprang upon Celia, huge teeth tearing into her flesh and ripping out her throat. She fell under the weight of its body, hot blood spilling all over the ground, and died seconds after she hit the ground. 1 minute later, her parents' car pulled into the driveway, its headlights blinding the white wolf as it pulled toward the house. Frightened, the wolf backed away from its kill and then ran away. The creature was never seen again. I'm honored once again to have you all as my guests. You are most welcome to join me in this exclusive presentation of Malice and Terror. This time our tale is a rather simple one. It speaks to the pitfalls of ignorance, especially when it comes to the unfortunate effects of the full moon. Our story is aptly entitled, Whose Name But the Wolf's? And it comes to you, silver bullets and all, courtesy of the Nightfall Radio Show. There are, I insist, such things as werewolves. Trust me, I'm an expert in matters like this. I've done a lot, and I mean a lot of damn reading on the subject. You see, the thing is, we've all been kind of conditioned. Well, to tell you the truth, fucking programmed is more like it. To accept some things as real and some things as fantasy. And I'm telling you right here and now that that kind of reasoning has deceived humanity to the extent that none of us, and make no mistake, I mean none of us can ever trust our individual nor our collective definitions of reality. Anyway, remember last year around this time when Glenn Hullins was killed out by Lake Hargrove? Had his goddamn throat torn out, stomach and chest ripped open. Messy business all the way around. Messy. Story even made in some of them big city newspapers, Miami, Atlanta, New Orleans. After the cleanup, cops came up with no leads, no suspects, no nothing. Dumbass deputy dog police. They didn't even take notice of the moon phases. Hey, I almost forgot. What about Renee Hughes, Betty Lang, and Christina Perez? Back in June, they, or what was left of them, was found at a campsite up in the mountains. It was a damn shame. 2 of the girls were missing their heads, which, by the way, were never found. The Perez girl was, let's just say that, for the county medical examiner, her body was a lot more difficult to deal with than the other 2. Okay, let's review. 4 deaths, 2 full moons. I tell you, some people just don't get it. Eventually, the state and federal boys got involved. Now, if you've ever wanted to see a bunch of rednecks tripping over each other and screwing up an investigation, this would have been the show for you. It was an all-timer. They brought out the horses and dogs, the choppers, and the sworn-in on-the-spot local hick deputies that are always part of situations like that. Anyhow, it didn't matter about all that when you stop and consider that none of those damn Einsteins knew what they were looking for. It never even entered their minds that all the deaths might be the work of a lycanthrope. Anyway, I, of course, knew exactly what was going on. Like I said before, I study this kind of stuff. I clipped all the stories in the papers and, get this, I even taped the reports off the TV and radio. The killings continued. In August, Willie Stelliford, 44-year-old guy of Farm Creek, Alabama, was found disemboweled in the middle of his own cotton field. Then in September, Nelson Weaver, 28, of Fremont, Georgia, was wheeling his way down Route 39 on his Harley. It was late and he was trying to make up some time that he lost when his bike had shut off on him in Regent Circle. All the damn thing needed was a new spark plug. A $2 spark plug. That's how much his life ended up costing. As he came onto the Wilmington Bridge, he saw the thing dart out in the middle of the road. He tried to stop or at least slow down and turn around, but only succeeded in skidding out of control. From that point on, the matter was purely academic. The animal thing bit savagely into his arm, and Nelson felt his world sink into a fiery sea of searing pain and blood. Luckily, he bled to death.
You know, of course, that Nelson lived, he would eventually have become just like his attacker. See? I know all about this stuff. Anyway, the police are still looking. They'll probably never come up with anything, and we'll have to close the investigation until the next death. And there will be a next one. They could come and ask me for help, but they probably won't, because police already know everything there is to know about everything, right? Well, it's getting kind of late, and I've got to get out of here. Got to have some time to myself. Can't sit here chatting with you all night. Got a little bit of a headache. I get them from time to time, you know. Need to get some fresh night air. Besides, I'm hungry. And tonight, there's a full moon.
It's been said that there are certain places of such foreboding that you should never enter at any time for any reason. Thus, such locales are often designated as no man's land. Our story speaks of such a place, a realm of darkness, danger, and endless evil. Now, for those of you who've gathered here before, that should come as no surprise. Witness therefore a tale called Werewolf Forest, a monstrous destination spot dead in the center of the Nightfall radio show. I stamped down the underbrush with my boot. The dry leaves and dead plants snap sharply like firecrackers. The moon, full, shines through the overhanging branches of the trees. Notes of the silvery light shone like pillars of silvery mist stretching into the sky. The trees, now dark and foreboding in the night, loom over as if looking down on me. My footsteps seem explosive in the dead silence, unbroken except by the sound of small creatures dashing through the grass. I feel as if I'm being watched by the shadows themselves. The sensation seems to increase, like a gentle pressure at the back of my head. I quickly whirl around to face nothing, only the dark trees and darker shadows. I think I see a moving figure. In the swirling darkness, something is there, seeming to be cloaked in the very dark of night. I hesitate, wondering if it's paranoia from my fear-filled mind or an evil figure darker than night itself. The fear takes over, overloading my senses and controlling my limbs. I run, my feet flying below me as if they were not my own. I fly over the terrain. The world blurs, and all that seems real are my burning lungs in endless stride, my body fueled by sharp stabs of fear. My heart pounds against my chest so loud I can hear it thumping in my ears. The shadow that is following me is gaining, its hulking form blotting out the shafts of moonlight, the air filled with sounds of its hoarse breathing. The tremors of my footfalls jolt up my frantic legs, my breath expelling in clouds of whispery smoke in the cold night air. My boot catches on an upturned root and I fall, my body twisting below me. I call out as I fall because I know that it's all over. The monster gives a triumphant howl that echoes through the dark forest. What a fool I was to think that I would survive a night in Werewolf Forest, to think the stories were just stories. The ragged wisps of gray clouds that had obscured the round moon now pulled back like drawn curtains, and I see my pursuer, a hulking monstrous form, neither man nor beast, but a horrible combination of both. Its horrible long teeth glisten with saliva, and in place of hands, dark paws with ugly claws like black daggers. It howls once more into the blackness. I try to move, run, hide, but my body feels paralyzed with fear. I can only scream and watch. The monster's head is silhouetted in front of the glow of the moon before it plunges down onto my prone body. Its teeth sink into my shoulder and the pain races through my body like a shock wave of icy spikes. I gasp as its fangs withdraw from my flesh, and the last thing I see is the form disappearing into the darkness. My eyes flutter open to a strange scene. I'm lying on a soft bed, clean so I can smell the detergent. My mind wanders back to the strange dream I had, but when I glance over, I see my shoulder wrapped in thick gauze, and my fears are confirmed. It was no dream. The light is blinding, and my senses are hyper-aware of everything. The smells of soap and antibacterial cleaning solutions. I hear the buzzing of incandescent lights and people walking down halls and the sound of people talking. I hear and smell the young nurse long before she enters, accompanied by an older man with graying hair and a stethoscope around his neck. The first words out of my mouth are, "Where am I?" The doctor provides me with the answer. Someone who didn't give his name or address had brought me in from Werewolf Forest, where I'd been for 2 days. The doctor dabbed some horrible smelling antibacterial chemicals that stung both my shoulder and my super-sensitive nose. And the next day I was let go. That was a month ago. Now I stand in Werewolf Forest with the dark trees looming overhead and the full moon rays illuminating both the ragged clouds that cover it and the darkening sky. The forest is new to my hyperactive senses. I can hear and smell every animal, identify every bird chirp. The clouds slide dramatically away from the bright moon they cover, and the rays fall upon my face. My heart pounds, and I feel a shiver of anticipation flash through my body. My human hands, so soft and fleshy, become clawed paws. Black pads replace my palms. I feel my small, rounded ears become pointed at the top of my head. I kick off my shoes and watch, astonished as my feet become furred paws. My jaw pushes out, lengthening into a wolfish muzzle, my nose becoming leathery and wet. What a goddamn rush! Nothing could compare to the pure adrenaline sensation I feel energizing my whole body, sending more shivers through my changing limbs. My entire body is covered by a rippling of fur, and I feel my spine lengthening at its base, a wolf tail ripping through my clothes. I feel alive like I'd never before. I've never truly lived until this rebirth. I run, truly feeling what it is to be alive. Feel the world whipping by my heart, beating in pure exhilaration. If this be Satan's curse, I welcome it. I am the werewolf of Werewolf Forest. The power was passed by the werewolf that had bitten me so long ago. I howl my song of pure bliss to the moon, and I am free. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I offer you a warm and hearty welcome to this most unusual abode, which is neither warm nor populated by living things with beating hearts. I'd like to offer up a little something for your consideration. A full moon, an isolated farmhouse, and the terror experienced by one man when he discovers that some of the old legends are in fact true. Incidentally, this is the Nightfall radio show, and our story is called By the Light of an Ozark Moon. On summer nights, when the heat lay like a woolen blanket over the Ozark forests and wrapped the hills with humidity, Grandmammy would sit on the front porch where she smoked, staring out over the fertile valley and sloping fields that led to the river. If it was the dark of the moon, she would tell funny stories and laugh with us. A crescent or half moon filled her with nostalgia. Her tales on those nights came from her childhood, but it was different if the moon waxed full. A full moon above the woodland is a majestic sight. The moonlight silvered the tall trees and made the rocks shimmer with that almost ghostly light, but I never found it beautiful because a full moon upset my grandmother. She was a brave woman. I've seen her kill copperheads with nothing more than a large rock or the sharp edge of her hoe. I once watched a tornado dance a destructive path across the valley, uprooting trees in its wake, and she did not flinch nor even seek the safety of the root cellar. She feared little, but the full-bellied moon struck terror into her heart. I did not understand why, not for years, but I knew, as did we all, that on nights when the moon was full she would turn maudlin and might weep. On those nights, despite her fears, my grandfather would always leave. I thought he went coon hunting, a common enough pastime in the Ozark woods, until I was about 10. I noticed that he did not take the hounds, Lucky and Shep, along, nor did he take his gun, and his buddies did not come to meet him on the ridge. I asked just once where he went on those bright nights, but Grandmammy made me no answer, and I lacked the courage to ever ask again. Her eyes held such agony, her mouth twisted with distress, and I could not question her about Grandpa's whereabouts again. I was there on the farm, more often in summer than in winter, but I recall that on those December nights when the moon swelled full that Grandmammy huddled in a corner of the large living room, the television turned low. Although she stared straight ahead, she was not watching the fuzzy, snowy picture on the screen, nor was she gazing at the Christmas tree, a cedar cut down in the hills and carried in to be decorated with popcorn, paper garlands, and a tin-foil star. She always put me to bed earlier than usual on nights of the full moon, no matter how much I protested. In the summer I lay awake long into the heated dusk and wondered where Grandpa went, but in winter I curled beneath the quilts and slept, no matter how early she sent me upstairs. I may seem dense, but I never made the connection to the full moon and his absences. During the other moon cycles, he was a good grandfather. I toddled after him as he did his farm chores as soon as I could walk. He took me swimming on steamy summer afternoons down at the river, in the wide bend everyone called the swimming hole. I learned to float and later to swim there, in those cold, clear waters. On occasion, a snake might swim past, but I wasn't afraid. He loved homemade ice cream, Lucky Strike cigarettes, and wore faded denim overalls. He was a farmer who tended to his cows, a father who raised his 6 children with a firm hand and loving heart, a husband who provided for his bride for almost 70 years. And he was a werewolf. Saying the word, even now, is very difficult for me. It is hard for me to match the man I loved so dearly, a man I modeled my life after, with the wild, snarling beast he became when the moon grew full. I might never have believed it but for the thing that happened, what I saw myself, and what I experienced. I was no longer a child. I was a man, married with a 2-year-old son and another on the way. Although I was not a farmer by trade, I had become an officer of the law, a highway patrolman with the state police. I was building my life on the foundations Grandpa built for me. Although past 90, he was still alive, and so was Grandmammy. They still lived on the farm, although the cattle were sold, and the fields would have grown up into brush if my uncle had not run his small herd into their pastures. As often as I could, I gathered my wife, Trinity, my son, Chase, and we went to the farm. Sometimes it was just a weekend visit, a brief trip back home, but on more than one vacation, we headed for the farm. Trinity griped because the farm was and is isolated. The old farmhouse lacked air conditioning, but the breezes that blew up the narrow river valley had cooled it for generations. Chase followed Grandpa as I had, and I did what I could around the farm to keep things up, fixing a fence, painting trim, and such. That autumn, my wife was 5 months pregnant with our second child, and she didn't want to leave the city for the farm. I had promised my grandparents that I would come, promised Chase that he would pick up walnuts in the October days, so my son and I came alone to the farm. Always before, I had made good time on the long drive out of Kansas City, but that Friday night I was running late. Because of a major traffic accident on one of the highways that feed into the city, I was late leaving my shift. By the time I arrived home, Trinity had supper ready, and already more than a little mad about my planned weekend trip, insisted that we eat before we left. We ate, and then we jumped into my pickup truck, another thing in which I aped Grandpa, and headed south. Dark fell long before we reached the Ozark Hills, but I didn't mind. A full harvest moon, orange as the pumpkins we would carve at Halloween, rose and illuminated the highway. It lit the countryside that we traveled through, and as I came down the long drive that led through the fields to the farmhouse, it bathed everything with a rich light. I will admit that I had all but forgotten Grandmammy's strange preoccupation with a full moon. Somehow our visits had been through no design in other parts of the lunar cycle, and so I thought nothing of the full moon. I admired, in fact, how lovely the farm looked in that light, how the farmhouse rose from the earth like something out of a Currier and Ives print. Chase was asleep, snug in his car seat as I rolled my Silverado to a stop around the back of the house. Several of the downstairs windows were alight with a cheerful glow, and I didn't realize that anything was wrong until Grandmammy rushed out of the back door. "Henry's not back!" The words burst out of her throat. She did not bother with a greeting. Past 90, she moved with slow steps most of the time, but that night she moved with the speed and grace of a much younger woman. "He went up into the woods 'fore dark, and he isn't back. You best get inside now." Worry crawled up the back of my neck. At 95, there were many things that could have happened to Grandpa, and none was very pleasant. As I mentally berated myself for not doing more to limit his activities around the farm, or urging them to move into the nearby town, I fumbled for the words. "Let me carry Chase in, and I'll go find him." I was not eager to go into the woods and search, but I saw no other alternative. Although I would be able to see with the moonlight in my service flashlight, I was worried about any lingering copperheads coiled on rocks to catch the fading warmth of the day. I was also, to be honest, afraid of what I might find. In my career, I've seen many dead bodies, most mangled in vehicle accidents, a few killed in cold-blooded murder. I'd faced death long ago, and while I didn't enjoy looking it in the eye, I really did not want to find my grandfather's body in the woods. I was about to suggest that we call for help from the local sheriff when Grandmammy spoke. "No!" That single word fell hard between us. "No, Greg, you won't. You'll come in this house and we'll lock the door. You can't go after him, not now, not after dark has fallen." Although I had believed her to be of sound mind despite her advanced age, I wondered if I had been wrong. As I unstrapped my son from the car seat and carried him into the house, I questioned her. "Don't you want me to go find him? He may be sick or hurt or—" "No." She shook her head back and forth with force. "He may well be, but you can't go after him, not until morning." "But he might be—" I didn't want to say the word. She had no such compunction. "Dead? Yes, son, he might well be dead by then, but if you go now, you may be as well. He's not dead just yet." I wondered how she could know, or think she knew, but then I stopped halfway through the back door as a strange sound rippled the still night air. The howl sounded angry. It sounded almost human, and yet something like a wolf. Perplexed, I looked at my grandmother. She, frail and feeble, took my son from my arms and said, lips tight, "I'll put the boy to bed and then I'll tell you what I should have told you before." I waited, uneasy, listening as her footsteps clumped up the stairs. I knew each creak of the floor, and it seemed like a very long time until she returned, winded. Her face had the harsh lines of a carved mask, something Native American or even African. As she settled down into her old armchair, she reached for a cigarette. "Grandmammy, you quit smoking years ago." I was shocked. She'd given up smoking after her 70th birthday. Her aged lips clamped tight on the unfiltered Lucky, and she lit it with a match. "For what I have to tell you, Greg, I need a cigarette. You won't believe me, but please don't think I'm a crazy old woman. What I'm going to tell you is true." Her smoke made me cough as I asked, "What is it?" In her matter-of-fact, everyday tone, she said, "Henry's a werewolf. Been one since he was a boy of 12. It's a secret I've carried for many years and a secret I hoped never to tell anyone." I could not believe her. A werewolf? Please, I thought as I tried to banish the image of a late-night movie where an old gypsy woman warned a werewolf. "Oh, Grandmammy." I thought I understood now. She had lost her mind, and I tried to find a plan that would both help her and find my grandfather. She shot me a look that curdled my heart, a hard, knowing look I'd never seen on her face before. "I knew you wouldn't believe me, but it's so. I knew when I married him. He told me the night before we wed, but I loved Henry, and so I married him anyway. I moved here to this farm, and 'twas his own mother taught me what to do when the spells come on him. His daddy had made a place in a cave up on the hill, a place where Henry could go and shut himself into when the moon was full. When he was a little boy, they locked him in, but by the time I knew him, Henry put himself into the cave. At first, his daddy was the one to go let him out in the morning, but soon it was me. I've done it for all these years, rain or shine, wet or cold. I could not imagine that there was a cave on the farm. I knew, or thought I did, every foot of the woods and the farm. I played along, though, to buy time so that I could help my grandparents. Then he isn't locked up tonight?" Her sigh echoed in the room, and she blew smoke out of both nostrils with a snort. "No, he's getting slower these days, and he wasn't out of the yard yet when the moon rose. I ain't watched him turn in years, but I saw him tonight, changing from a man into a werewolf. If you don't believe me, his clothes lay on the ground out by the little barn. You heard him howl, same as me, didn't you?" I was cold, colder than I'd ever been, and my hands trembled. She made it sound so possible, so plausible, but I couldn't admit the truth. "I heard a coyote." It didn't sound like a coyote, though, but it must be. There were no such beings as werewolves, and if there were, Grandpa could not be one. "Nope, you heard Henry. He's out there running wild in the woods, howling and doing God knows what. He may kill some stock, I hope no more than that, because he's a beast, a raging beast. No man can stop him tonight, not unless they have a silver bullet." I looked around the comfortable living room I knew so well, and it had not changed. The same vintage furniture, that hurricane lamp she had always had, and the prints on the wall had faded, but were the same I remembered from my childhood. Yet everything I knew and believed had changed, and I realized nothing would ever be the same again. In that moment, I felt out of kilter, so out of sync with life that I wanted to scream, to howl myself like an animal, and in that moment, I began to believe that perhaps my grandfather could be a werewolf after all. If someone stops him, won't they kill him? I had to know. Yes, but he may have to be stopped. I've always known that. 2 tears, one on each side of her face, rolled down toward her chin, and I wanted to cry myself. "Grandmammy, I'm beginning to believe this crazy thing," I told her. "But I have to know how he became a werewolf." She lit a second Lucky Strike from the end of the one she had smoked down to the butt. "I asked myself years back. When Henry was a little boy, he liked to prowl the woods, sometimes at night. He come home one night saying a wolf bit him. That was around 1920. His folks cleaned the wound, washed it out with whiskey, and thought he would be fine. Biggest worry they had was rabies, but when the moon come full again, he turned into a werewolf." I listened, feeling like I must be having a nightmare. that I would wake up back in the townhouse with Trinity beside me, but the smell of the tobacco smoke, the feel of the rump-sprung couch under me screamed reality. It was true then, a terrible truth, and I wondered just why Grandmammy had told me. Then I realized that she had been worried about chasing me, afraid in case Grandpa roared out of the dark to bite us or even kill us. Her fear was born out of love. "You were worried he might attack us," I said, hating each word as I forced it up my dry throat. "We're safe now inside the house with you. And Grandpa, he'll be all right in the morning, won't he?" I should have known that there would be more. Something else even more terrible than the bare knowledge that my beloved grandfather was a werewolf. But I did not, and I wasn't prepared. "No, he won't," Grandmammy said. Another undulating howl outside, close enough to make the window glass tremble and raise the hair on the back of my neck. He would have been if he'd got to the cave in time, but since he ain't, he'll smell our blood. He'll come for us, Greg, unless you stop him. My mind froze, blanked out, and I stared at her, unable to comprehend what she asked me to do. When I understood, I began to shake, to tremble, and to feel a rising nausea twist my stomach into knots. My grandmother, a strong woman, who had succored me and given much to my raising, was asking me to kill my grandfather. If I hadn't already been certain, the sight of the single silver bullet she pulled from her pocket would have convinced me. I rebelled against the idea that I could kill the grandfather that I had loved, shoot him through the heart with this absurd silver bullet, and told her, "I can't kill Grandpa. I can't." "You've killed before." Her tone was no nonsense and firm. And God help me, she was right. I'd shot 3 perps in my career. One, a drug-crazed man who threatened to kill his infant daughter. Another, a man who rushed me with a knife on a dark road. And the last, a young man who had shot the man who had hit his wife's car head-on and then turned to shoot me in his grief-induced insanity. Those deaths were in the line of duty. The dead were strangers, and I had shot to defend myself. Killing my grandfather was something quite different. "I have, but it's different." Grandmammy rose, her aged bones creaking as she pulled herself upright. Her gnarled, worn fingers pushed the bullet into the palm of my hand and wrapped my reluctant fingers around it. "No, it's not. He will kill me, kill you, and kill your son before he's done. The bloodlust is on him now, Greg, and he won't stop. He may be an old man in life, but he's powerful strong as a werewolf. Grandpa would want you to kill him before he hurt any of us. You know that, and if you don't, well, we talked about it some years ago." "I can't." Even as I spoke, I realized that I could, that killing him would be as much an act of love as defense. I thought of my small son upstairs, his tender body that would crunch beneath the werewolf's fangs, and I steeled myself to do what must be done. Better to end Grandpa's long torture as a werewolf now than wait until one of us lay dead. Better to kill him before he might make my son another werewolf. "My revolver is in the car," I said, my words choking up through repressed tears. "I'll get it." Grandmammy nodded. "Best load it right off in case you need it." 1,000 stars sparkled overhead, paled by the strong light of the full moon. I reached into the truck and grasped my weapon, chambered the silver bullet, and turned at the sound of something large running. I cannot call that thing Grandpa, came out of the woods. A tall, strong beast, at least 7 feet tall. Thick, coarse, dark brown hair covered the body. The mouth snarled at me, growling, and I saw the teeth, terrible fangs stained with rich red blood. As it jumped at me, lunged toward me, I aimed my weapon and fired 1 shot. I did not miss. I'm a noted sharpshooter, and the shot found its mark. At the moment of impact, the creature screamed, a horrible, anguished sound that made my blood run cold. tears slicked my cheeks, and I realized that I cried out too. My wordless cry of grief, of pain, of terror came when the yellow eyes altered, shifted, and became my grandfather's familiar brown eyes. I watched as the fur faded, leaving a naked old man's body gaunt and pitiful in the moonlight. He was dead, and the rest of the truth came to me then. I would answer for this in the bright light of day, for shooting my grandfather through the heart, and no one would ever believe what I knew was true. He was a werewolf.
Abizanda, Spain, September 29, 1992. We drove a few miles and parked at the crest of a bluff overlooking a series of mostly barren fields. There was little greenery save the occasional patch of scrub. The sun had already sunk beneath the rim of the world. My companion Sergio revealed from a case a 6.5 by 54 caliber Mannlicher Schnauer. Looking out across the landscape, he said to me, "Now we will wait." We waited there on the bluff for what seemed like hours, but I realized later that no more than 20 minutes had expired before the most horrific sound I had ever heard came rushing across the landscape. It was not exactly a howl, nor was it a scream. It was, upon reflection, a preternatural wail heralding the fulfillment of a curse. Sergio advised me to take my field glass and look to the left at about 75 yards. My field of vision was illuminated by an impossibly bright full moon. So was the view through the scope of Sergio's rifle. As the baneful wail began to echo down to nothing, I saw it. I saw it running at a tremendous speed. I could even make out the dust kicked up by clawed feet ripping across the ground. Although clearly inhuman, I could detect the vestiges of clothing, ripped, torn, and flailing in the air stirred by the motion of the thing. It took large, loping strides, and strangely, its arms barely moved, as if it were unnecessary for generating torque. It was at just that moment of my contemplation that Sergio fired a shot. The shot shook me to my core. Yet I saw the bullet strike and take the thing to the ground. Then, to my horror, it rose again, in what were mere moments. I watched as it quickly resumed its surreal digitigrade loping across the dark landscape. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. That shot through the midsection would have killed any man ever born, and yet this monstrosity was knocked down by nothing more than the force of the bullet. Then Sergio fired again. The second shot struck the thing in the upper arm or shoulder, for I saw the ragged shirt flare upon impact and a patch of it blew off. The beast did not fall this time, but was pushed by the strike only momentarily before it continued its mad sprint. Sergio got off one more round before the thing finally dashed out of our field of vision. Again, that terrible wail exploded in the darkness all around us. I realized that we were now vulnerable to an attack from virtually any direction. Would the wolfman seek escape, or, as I feared, seek to exact vengeance upon us? Certainly, if Sergio's rifle had failed to stop the beast, there was little hope of success in a hand-to-hand confrontation. In any other situation, we would have been more than a match for an assailant. I was 24 years old at the time. Although Sergio was 10 years my senior, we were both well over 6 feet tall and easily capable of giving a good account of ourselves. We agreed, however, with a glance and a nod, that indeed discretion was the better part of valor. As we headed back to the Jeep, I found myself muttering and musing aloud. What in God's name was that? And Sergio replied in a rare smattering of English. Nothing in God's name. That was the hombre lobo. We came to learn that the monstrous fiend that haunted the hills, woods, and quiet roads amongst the villages was a wolf man, a thing quite different from the so-called werewolf of legend. It was a man, cursed, possessed as it were by a bestial dark spirit that waged war with the soul of the man it sought to subdue and imprison. As such, the demon was brought to the fore when the forces of evil were at their strongest, especially in conjunction with the coming of the full moon. Unlike the natural wolf, the murderous abomination walked on two legs, at times even adorned the shredded remnants of the man's clothing. Strangely, until the time of the blood moon, the eyes retained a saddened human quality. We learned from the villagers that the burning of sulfur was prone to keeping away wolves. The scent permeated the air in the village square and the adjoining pathways. One night we ventured out against strenuous admonitions to investigate the strange happenings. This was the night that I was to experience the preternatural reality of the horror that has haunted me these many years. What I witnessed that night has never left me, and the nightmarish visage is a constant companion. It reminds me that at times, that the devil does indeed walk the earth. The following is an excerpt from the journal of Sergio Morales. Last night the thing appeared in the field below the village. The professor too witnessed the creature. I am sure now that he is convinced, as I have been for some time, that this was an unnatural thing. 3 times my rifle found its target, and yet the howling devil endures. I spoke today with Senor Abizanda and Sergeant Gomez. They have agreed to consult with the professor. Is it possible that together we can rid this village of its terrible curse? The body of night watchman Jose Mancilla was found inside his small 2-room office building on the morning of October 1st. He had been beaten and pummeled with unimaginable force. His face and throat had been ripped and torn as if by the claws of a raving beast. Abisanda was a small hamlet, and the word of the horror spread like the plague. Item: the previously installed security camera revealed a brief moment of the deed, but little more. The tape itself was viewed by local officials before being secreted away. Item: the killer was possessed of incredible strength. The metal door, locked and bolted from the inside, had been forcefully pulled from the hinges and slung 30 feet. Item: the momentary flash of activity revealed by the tape indicated that the killer was in fact the same impossible monstrosity recently witnessed by Sergio and myself dashing across the fields below the town. This is as much as I dare reveal to you here. Suffice it to say that such horrors exist in this world. Though I wish it were not so, failure to disclose the reality of such things would for me be the highest form of hypocrisy. I've seen it. I've witnessed it, and it has been like a plague of nightmares upon me since those long ago days. So what do you think? There may perhaps be as many reactions to this experience as ears that hear it. I am therefore quite content to leave the burden of final judgment to you. If what you've heard horrifies or shocks you, and has forever changed your concept of reality, allow me to offer you one small glint of relief. Tell yourself, as I have day after day, night after night, that it's only a story. If you can do that much, you can convince yourself that behind the safety of your door, in the quiet of your bed, that it couldn't happen here.
Once again, we've gathered here to delve into the ambient darkness that surrounds our facade of normality. This time around it'll be easy. Easy in the sense that we're dealing with stock and trade monsters. Claws, fangs, fur, and fury. In accordance with this, our story is called A Killing Moon. So buckle in and prepare for that which is best put on display here on the Nightfall Radio Show. The ceremony was only halfway through when the warm Gulf winds dashed up suddenly, as if out of nowhere, and passed like a lurking thief over the dipping and swaying cypress trees. The stars were shining brightly, turning the darkness into tingling crystal. The angle shadows were pure and well-defined. The swamp was literally crawling with life under the staring cloak of the night, and the cattails whipped and whistled in the wind with burning cheer. Beneath them, the bullfrogs sang in a horrible harmony that decorated the night with grim demeanor and despair. The night was itself. Deeper into the swamp, the owls screamed and then swept down from their perches in search of prey, the fluid wavering of their wings barely kissing with sound. A giant alligator, chamberlain of the marsh, maneuvered its greenish-black form, which challenged 18 feet toward the shore, where a white-tailed doe had come for what was to be her last midnight drink. The forest floor moved, slithered, leapt, and crept dangerously underneath the shadowy dome. Here a man could easily lose himself because this place was secret and its nature was sinister. Things were born here, dark things that moved across the misty nightmares of little boys and made them want to sleep with the lights on. Some, who of a more superstitious nature, would call these things monsters. The civilized world knew nothing of this awful place. The man in denim sat down quietly, resting his tired back by leaning against a large tree. A sudden wind gave him a chill, and he cupped his hands to his mouth and blew into them. His deep, black eyes shimmered, and the stiff breeze forced tears from them. He was practically exhausted after his long trek, and at that particular point in time, did not really know nor want to know what to expect next. Outwardly he was calm, but there was an inner force slowly vibrating upward to the surface of his being. He could not shake the premonition. He was nailed to his own hellish nightmares, which had haunted him for the last 7 months. 8 months ago, he had fallen into a strange fever which broke after about 3 days. Afterwards, the dreams came. In them, he became a slave to a monstrous, blood-drinking demon named Basu. And from this demon, there was no escape. The beast constantly hurled fire under his feet so that he could not run away. It wasn't just any fire either, but rather a fire so sharp, so searingly blue that even the shadow cast by his soul withered into whited nothingness. Then he swam in an endless sea of blood, and as he swam, he drank. He was held in place in this grotesque quagmire of evil until rising flames had totally consumed him. Then, naked coldness. He thought about the psychiatric attention that he'd received in Atlanta. It had done nothing for him. The dreams continued as if to spite his meager attempts at stopping them. Now he had come to this place, this nowhere of 1,000 endless dead nights to get some answers. Reluctantly, he got up and walked on. Even in the dark, he knew that the dilapidated shack that he had been directed to was abandoned. The man in denim looked around, silently confused, until he looked down the hill between the wavering bald cypress trees dressed lightly in Spanish moss, and caught the moon dancing on the surface of the black water. The face of the swamp masqueraded as a gigantic mirror and became, quite suddenly, an ethereal canvas upon which some invisible but powerful force painted the solemn but abstract tragedy that was the night. He moved downward out of the hummock, somewhat clumsily at first, but smoothed out his steps as he adjusted to the pull of gravity. After he had gone about 40 yards,
the large dock came into his field of vision. What he noticed first was not the orange flames that danced from the mouth of large oil barrels, nor the circle of thick red candles arranged and burning in a circle around it. No. What he noticed first was the feeling of dread that emanated from the entire scene. Then the woman came into view, the priestess. She was composed of deadly beauty that was thick with malice, and her sensual grace clung to her like a dagger struck to the hilt in a dead man's spine. The simple white dress that she wore traced the tempting outline of her perfect form, and she began to walk back and forth slowly, chanting as she went. The man in denim understood none of this. He walked out onto the dock. Carefully, and with agonizing slowness, the priestess walked across the entire length of the dock where the man in denim was standing. The half-rotted boards creaked as if they were in pain under the weight of her tan feet. She moved over to the edge of the dock and reached down into the water. As the man in denim looked on in curiosity, the priestess drew from the murky water what appeared to be the hide of an animal. She turned to him. "To live forever, you must be cloaked by Mother Night," she said. "What the hell do you mean by that?" the man in denim asked. "You know as well as I do what that means, my love. I know of your dreams and I know of your destiny, and they are one." The priestess moved closer to him, and when she had come within an arm's distance of him, she looked into his eyes with an expression of promise, and then draped the dripping hide over his shoulders. The water from the dead thing soaked through his shirt, and almost instantly he felt very cold. The woman drew herself to him and pressed the firmness of her youthful bosom against his. Locked with him, she fused her ample lips at his mouth and probed furiously for his tongue. Part of the man in denim perished as wave after wave of immeasurable lust rose in him. In his excitement, he tore away the woman's thin garment, instantly exposing her waiting breasts with spicy brown nipples that were virtually pulsating with desire. Ready for her, he plunged his steel-hard length into her creamy brown velvet net of softness. She moaned and dug her fingernails into his back, and then made a mad attempt at removing his wet shirt. He sucked on her breasts in a rapid series of slurps, licks, and kisses. With her abdomen slapping into his at a frantic pace, they both sailed nearer to the detonation. Then a wave of fog descended upon them like a blanket, and the man in denim was blinded. He forgot everything. His eyes knew only black space, void of light, sensation, or thought. An invisible and mindless vacuum swept the part of him that was a man away. A second later, when the fog lifted, they were no longer alone. There were men all around them. All of them, like the man in denim, were black. There were 8 of them. They were topless, wearing only loose-fitting short trousers. They formed a circle around the man in denim and sat down on the dock. They crossed their legs with military tightness. Their heads were perched as they gazed up into the distant night sky. They were looking at the moon. The man in denim marveled. All this seemed to be a small fragment of his dreams, but he wasn't certain. Suddenly, as if the men were reading his thoughts, they lowered their heads and stood with a violent, robotic jerk. Then the man in denim heard drums. At first it seemed that they were far away, but as each second passed, the pounding tipped closer and closer to his receptive ears. Then the drumming became thunderous, and the men broke into a raging dance. They moved around and around in a large circle, and the power that came from them was that of a furious cyclone. The beat of their feet against the wooden dock sent the man in denim's heart racing into infinity. His mind exploded with each fiery chant and incantation. He became dizzy, and he began to mindlessly sway with the waterfall rush of the massive rhythms and drowning tones of the dark sabbatical cries from these mad disciples of the serpent. Around them the night was growing cooler, like a fading heartbeat which leads inevitably into a silent and lonely death.
drums began to fade. The pounding gradually slipped further and further away until at last the sounds were less than a memory. The man in denim again noticed the priestess. He felt her x-ray every fiber of his being. Then she gazed at the moon, the full moon, and then back at him. He somehow summoned the strength to look back at her and notice with a delayed but awakening horror that her eyes were the moon. Those eyes, which had once been swirling pools of inviting nectar, had in an instant become something unspeakable. Her eyes were his horror, his nightmare. Then he noticed something else. To his wrenching terror, the men were all sitting and mutating right before his stunned eyes. He watched on in disgust as their brown skin was ripped grotesquely away from their bodies, only to be replaced by a horrid tidal wave of coarse black hairs that pierced every layer of their flesh. The men woke up the night as they twisted painfully, their forms slowly metamorphosizing into demonic agents of torture. Their yellow, predatory eyes flashed with amazing awareness. Their faces were distorting and elongating into howling masks that held dagger-like fangs that were dripping with murderous venom. The man in denim, drunk with apocalyptic fear, began to feel himself and everything slip away. The beasts were about at this hour. His fate was sealed. The curse was complete. The swamp grew deathly quiet as the man in denim drug his weary body over to the embankment. Then, beyond all that had passed before his eyes, he found true terror. Within him, there was madness, and he was its marionette. He began digging furiously into the black mud, snatching and pulling away rancid hunks of earth, until at last he had burrowed his entire body into the miserable stench itself. And there he found sleep. The next day was October 1st. The night seemed, at least on the surface, to be composed of dark ice and invisible iron. The blackness blew its potent breath with just enough force to coax the changing leaves from their branches. Overhead, the moon had attained a dripping yellow fullness that cautiously lit the marsh that the Timucua Indians called Night Mother. The creature, whatever it was, raised its head up slowly toward the sky. Tonight it would feed. It had failed to find prey the night before, but that had been the first night of the new cycle, and the hunger had not been so feverishly hot as it is now. The disastrous and incurable lust for that sweet crimson wine swirled through the beast's boiling demonic mind. Its black pelt flashed in the moonlight as its powerful legs sprung its monstrous form forward. A scent was in the sharp autumn air, a scent that made the demon's hunger liken unto a buckling floodgate. A force beyond the thing's reasoning pulled it through the night, summoning it with murderously evil commands as it dashed over marsh weeds and behind the already naked trees. The scent was stronger. It called. It begged and pleaded to have its source completely dissolved into nothingness. The thing now moved through the night with the agility of some dark mercenary that had been somehow superimposed onto reality from some hell-driven dimension. It darted left with the wind to the very spot where its eventual prey had been only moments before. The scent was now at its strongest, and the beast's long strides led it out of the wood and onto deserted Hemingford Road. It looked right and saw its prize. The beast sensed in its perverted mind the warmth and energy of Ken Sayre's pulsating heart. It began salivating madly. Sayre, owner of the Starlight, the only motel in Bremen, Georgia, was there changing a tire that had encountered about 10 rusty nails probably 10 or 12 miles back when he turned off Old Highway 32. Shit, he thought to himself. Goddamn road crews. He looked at his watch and knew that he would be more than an hour and a half late for Karen's roast beef, their usual Tuesday night meal.
His wife of 24 years always made it taste so good with mashed potatoes, broccoli, and hot buttered rolls. He was sure now that he'd have to settle for a cold roast beef sandwich washed in mayonnaise. In the morning, he would go to Hal's garage to buy a new tire. Ken Sayer picked up the punctured tire and headed for the trunk of the car. Then, all thoughts of tonight, tomorrow, and every other thing that a man thinks about came to an abrupt end as the creature pounced from a tree limb some 30 feet in the air down onto him. The beast threw its bear-like arms at Ken's chest, and the furious claws came out of the other side of his back. A shriek of pain and victory filled the night air. Then silence. The following night the air was still, almost singing a song of gray, macabre monotony. The stars appeared to be spying on the earth as if they were in search of some escaped cosmic fugitive. The night could scarcely muster a whimper. At 2:30 in the morning, Bremen slept. The quiet little South Georgia town wallowed in a warm, yellowed slumber as darkness consumed even the blackest shadow. Hugh Crawford had been looking out of his living room window only moments before, and had then resumed watching the late movie. It was The Horse Soldiers, his favorite John Wayne movie. The man's facial features denied his age, which was 58. His eyes were a deep hazelwood brown and were set perfectly in his abrasively handsome face. In his youth, he was said to have greatly resembled his mother, who proudly traced her ancestry back to the Bantu nation of Central Africa. But tonight, Hugh Crawford would drink too much. His foreman, Ralph Beelings, had let him know 2 days ago that he was among a group of about 30 employees at the Southern Regional Textile Company that would be picking up their last paycheck this Friday. They called it downsizing, and that, by God, was exactly what Hugh Crawford thought about doing to the whiskey in the bottle that he held in his hand. He thought about his wife, Linda. She died 2 years ago of viral pneumonia. Since then, his job had become his life. Now that too was dead. He thought to himself, fuck Beelings and his job. His hands groped the paper bag that contained the whiskey bottle, and he listened to the paper crackle. Then his head, indeed his lips, turned upward to receive the steamy, caramel-colored heaven. He forgot everything. You see, when you get right down to it, it didn't matter that Hugh Crawford had lost his wife. It didn't matter that he'd lost his job, and the future of all other aspects of his teensy-weensy piss-ass life were totally and completely inconsequential. Because at exactly 2:49, as the moon slipped into view outside his window, Hugh Crawford would lose everything. With horrific ease, the beast propelled its muscular frame through the window. The man's soul screamed with the shattering glass as he rose to face this night thing. There was only a moment of resistance, as no man's strength was proof against this, the ultimate predator. Hugh Crawford's body shuddered once, more in reflex than in consciousness. Then the beast emptied the man's entrails onto the floor and began its savage feast. Morning came. Dawn crept in silently and clung to the back of the swamp like a thirsting leech. The steel gray clouds hung low, almost as if they were longing to caress the dew-drenched cypress trees. The Blackwater was dead at this hour, and in truth, the moon had yet given up her reign over the heavens, and the smell of coming rain was in the air. The man covered his eyes as the dim light of morning drew to his head and struck like lightning. His body writhed when he realized that what he felt on his back was the grip of cold, wet leaves. He was lying down, sprawled out on the ground, totally naked. The earth beneath him was quite damp, and the man gave off a shudder as he allowed a wave of morning chill to wash over his body like a cascading snowfall. The man tried to stand, and in doing so nearly jumped 6 feet off the ground. He suddenly felt remarkably invigorated.
as if he'd just had the best night's sleep of his life. He stretched, raising his arms over his head. He knew at least for now he would be safe. This was his haven from humanity, a group he was coming to believe he no longer belonged to. The pain hit him suddenly, like a bullet on fire. He groped at his stomach and it began to churn and buzz like a nest of a million furious hornets. His head became a dervish of joking insanity, and now he knew that the release was inevitable. He felt the initial surge, and in a strain of gruesome muscular tension fought it back down. Then it came, and it came, and it came. Upward from his reeking, infected bowels shot a jet-propelled geyser of rocketing, stench-plagued human body parts, organs, limbs, and more. The next thing he knew was blood-boiling pain that bombarded all facets of his being and then left him to wander through blackness. When he woke up, night ruled. He looked around, and there on the ground beside him lay the results of his earlier illness. He stood there and kept his eyes locked on the mass of gore which seemed to be somehow staring right back at him. The horror of this vision, coupled with the nightmare realization of what he had become, made him weep. He stood alone that night, cold and naked, head in hands, crying for the lives that he had so unmercifully taken, and too for his own life, which as a werewolf would probably never end. The man in denim was hungry. He was on the outer edge of the marsh and was trying to reach the highway. He knew that once there, it wouldn't be long before he could find a place to have a meal. The man in denim had nearly made it to the highway when he came across the naked man in the woods crying. The naked man turned and faced him. "It's very dangerous here. If I were you, I'd leave this place quickly." The man in denim smiled, almost compassionately, and said, "But you aren't me, and I'm in no danger, I assure you." "But you are. I've done become something terrible. The moon does something to me, causes me to change, to kill. That's why I'm begging you in the name of God Almighty, leave now before..." The naked man didn't finish his sentence, or more correctly, he could not finish it. The man in denim was upon him, eyes red with unholy fury, jaws gaping wide with two gleaming white fangs which dug into the naked man's throat, shredding flesh and bone alike. The naked man had time for one scream only, for his head was savagely rent from his cursed body, and the vampire fed. There was once a beautiful girl engaged to a soldier who caught the eye of an evil woodsman who had sold his soul for the ability to turn himself into a wolf at will. He lay in wait for the girl when she was walking home one day and accosted her, begging her to elope with him. The maiden refused, spurning his love and crying out to her love to save her from his advances.
The girl's cries were heard by her eager fiancé, who had come searching for her when she was late returning to her parents' home. The soldier drove the woodsman away, threatening him with dire consequences if he ever approached the maiden again. The furious woodsman lay low for a few days, waiting for his chance. It came on the girl's wedding day. She was dancing happily at her wedding reception with a group of her friends when the woodsman, in the form of a wolf, leapt upon her and dragged her away with him. The enraged bridegroom gave chase, but the wolf and his bride had disappeared into the thick forest and were not seen again. For many days, the distraught soldier and his friends, armed with silver bullets, scoured the woods searching for the maiden and her captor. Once the soldier thought he saw the wolf and shot at it. Upon reaching the location, he found a piece of a wolf's tail lying upon the ground. But of the wolf to which it belonged, there was no sign. After months of searching, his friends begged him to let the girl go and get on with living. But the soldier was half mad with grief and refused to give up. And that very day he found the cave where the werewolf lived. Within it lay the preserved body of his beloved wife. The girl had refused the werewolf's advances to the very end and had died for it. After his murderous fury had died away, the werewolf had tenderly laid the body of the girl he had loved and had killed into a wooden coffin where it would be safe from predators, and he came to visit her grave every day. Lying in wait for him, the soldier shot the werewolf several times as he entered the cavern, chasing him down until the maddened and dying werewolf leapt into the lake and disappeared from view. The soldier sat by the lake with his gun, staring at the rippling waters for hours as the catfish ate the bloody bits of the wolf that were floating on the surface of the water. When his friends found him, the soldier's mind was gone. He babbled insanely about a werewolf that had been eaten by a catfish when it leapt into the water, and he sobered only long enough to lead the men to the body of his beloved before he collapsed forevermore into insanity. He died a few days later and was buried beside his bride in a little glen where they had planned to build their house. Their grave is long forgotten, and the place where it stands is covered with daisies in the spring. But to this day, the people of the area have a prejudice against eating catfish, though no one remembers why.
Listen to me, please, and be guided by these words. Listen well and heed the warnings that I bear witness to, for this horror is real. How Satan first came to intermix man and wolf and unleash the plague of lycanthropy upon the earth is lost in the mists of time. What is sure is that in doing so, he created a vile affliction that has contaminated many souls and caused much woe in the world. Any who suffer the ruinous misfortune of being bitten by a werewolf, and who does not die of their wounds before the first following full moon, will fall victim themselves to the curse. When first bitten, to all outward appearances, those who have become infected by lycanthropy are as normal men. However, when the moon is full, the contagion running through their veins takes hold, and they lose all control of their mind and body. An irresistible compulsion drives the lycanthrope to abandon his dwelling, and in the dead of night find open ground. When the full moon light falls upon the creature, the transformation from man to beast takes hold. Once in lupine form, bloodlust overwhelms the lycanthrope. and it succumbs to the animal cravings for blood and violence that course through his being. The first few times that this change occurs, the slaughter of mere animals will suffice to sate his appetite. However, as time passes and the plague begins fully to infect his soul, such dull flesh as this will no longer satisfy his cravings, and the werewolf must seek out human victims. The more lunar cycles that pass before a lycanthrope is destroyed, the harder it becomes for them to maintain the semblance of human form. Eventually they succumb fully to the beast that lurks within and spend the rest of their days in wolf form, roaming the nights in an outrageous frenzy of bloodlust. Werewolves have the intelligence of man allied to the feral cunning and ferocity of a wolf. This makes them a dangerous foe to pursue. However, the flowers of the wolf's bane plant have a similar effect on them as the Holy Cross does upon vampires. To guard a dwelling against their entry, you should cover all entrances in an abundance of these pungent flowers. As you hunt their kind, a necklace of wolf's bane will afford you great protection. Know also that only weapons tipped with silver may harm a werewolf. Should you embark upon such a quest as this, remember my words, and may God go with you.
The story begins with a priest from a thriving village in Ireland who was traveling to a nearby town on business for his church. The priest's journey across the countryside was long and arduous, and as night grew near, he was forced to set up camp near a dark forest that was reputed to be haunted. During the night, the priest heard a clawing and scratching outside his tent. When he went outside to investigate, he was attacked by a wolf. He was bitten severely, and just as he thought the wolf was about to finish him off, the cross around his neck was exposed. The wolf suddenly ceased its attack and merely stood over him, staring into his eyes. Then, inexplicably, it ran off and left him lying on the ground, bleeding badly from his wounds. The next day he managed to crawl back to his village, where he was discovered by the local doctor. With good medical care, his wounds soon healed, and he was back to work in no time. The priest was re-energized and tackled his preaching duties with renewed vigor. He inspired the villagers and helped them to build a new church. The faith of his parishioners was strengthened, and every day his church was packed with worshipers. But there were still some problems in the village. Every full moon, someone in the village was found dead or went missing under mysterious circumstances. People said that they had seen a creature stalking through the village at night. A creature that walked like a man, but whose body was covered in fur and bore the head of a wolf. There was talk of a curse on the village, and many believed that a werewolf was stalking them and picking them off one by one. The priest began to wonder why God had cursed his village with these horrible murders. It seemed as if there was no end to the death and destruction. One night during a full moon, the villagers decided that they had to catch and kill the werewolf that was plaguing their village once and for all. They set a trap by tying the most beautiful girl in the village to a tree, using her as bait to lure the werewolf. High above in the branches of the tree, they rigged up a trap to catch the wolf. Then they hid in the bushes and lay in wait for their prey. Soon they heard a crashing sound coming through the forest, and suddenly the werewolf appeared in the clearing. As it made its way towards the terrified young girl, the villagers cut the ropes that were tied to the tree, and a huge cage crashed down on top of the wolf, trapping him behind its heavy iron bars. The jubilant villagers rushed out from their hiding places and drove long spears into the body of the werewolf, piercing its heart. As the monster collapsed on the floor of the cage, the people watched his hairy body ripple and change. Gradually, the creature changed from wolf to man as the life ebbed from his body. The villagers fell to their knees and began to weep as they realized that they had killed their beloved priest. My name is Owen. I've recently shared some information and relayed experiences that I've had concerning the subject of vampires. I've tried and continue to try as best I can to convey the reality and nature of such things which still plague the world of men. And yet, there are still other horrors, other creatures spawned by demonic powers that yet exist in this world, and like the vampire, have been considered by most to be little more than fanciful or frightful elements of fiction and folklore. I speak now of another creature which, like the vampire, is a pariah even among the demonic. A creature which also can be traced back to the dawn of civilization. An evil, ravenous fiend, a thing of darkness, of shadow, of nightmares, and of God-forsaken reality. I speak to you about the lycanthrope, the werewolf. Now, if that word conjures up images and ideas that have been prevalent in film and television for the last 10 or 15 years, forget it. Just more Hollywood horse shit. In fact, these Hollywood renditions more closely resemble the non-terrestrial thing that is now popularly referred to as the dogman than an actual werewolf. But the issue of dogmen will have to wait. Like the vampire, contemporary media depictions of werewolves tend to attribute this syndrome to some rare, bizarre viral strain. Again, the attempt here is to make the inexplicable explainable by some reach of scientific understanding. Now, I know of a few cases, including the first in my experience in the state of Montana in 1968. And if you go looking in official records, you won't find any trace of what I'm talking about. Just a faint reference to unexplained mutilation murders. What I learned then, and in the years since then, I will share with you. It is, in fact, another manifestation of diabolical powers in our world. Another type of demon possession that goes ignored for the most part by so-called demonologists, occultists, and paranormal experts. In essence, it goes back to the time of Neolithic man when wolf and man competed with one another over predatory dominance. It's exactly this that demonic forces seek to exploit through the process of werewolfery. It is very much a mocking gesture through which evil can twist and distort the body of man into a foul, wicked, hideous form of man's most ancient adversary in the natural world. And so, as long as man has been man, from the fertile plains of Central Africa, the curse of the werewolf has been among us. Once the demonic wolf spirit attaches itself to its victim, the full manifestation takes place on a lunar cycle over a period of a few days each month, usually in conjunction with the rising of the full moon. But the moon doesn't actually cause this transition. You see, demonic spirits are more empowered to come forth when preternatural energies are at their strongest. And inasmuch as the moon gives off no light of its own but merely reflects sunlight, these dark forces feel no fear of the purifying direct rays of the sun and therefore manifest. But what about the transformation? It seems that's really what people want to know about. Well, it's actually more of a distortion than it is a true transformation, but it is monstrous. Wild bristles of hair flood out across the body. Fingernails extend into sharpened claws. The canine teeth push out to sharpen points. The brow pulls back and the ears contort up into a pointed disposition. And a man is now a monster. The werewolf enters the night, lurking in the shadows, dashing across open fields or down forgotten roads, or skulking lightless alleyways. The creature imbued with preternatural energy by the fiendish entity within, which no man could match, and also speed, agility, and reflexes that are such as could only be unnatural. But what about Silver? That's another issue that people always want to know about. The werewolf can be hurt, even injured, temporarily at least, by conventional methods of harm. Unlike the vampire, it is a living creature, but with diabolical regenerative ability. Silver, however, is fatal. But why? You see, silver is a purer metal than bronze and is a stimulator with a more intense energy than gold. Silver utilizes a tetrahedral molecular structure. Silver has a higher vibratory frequency, so it absorbs the most radiated energy. Simply put, the properties of silver prohibit the evil spirit's ability to manifest or even to retain possession. Better still, I would suggest a weapon of silver that has been blessed or otherwise sanctified in any method that would stay the hand of evil. Now, that may shatter the senses of any of you who may hold no regard for higher spiritual realities. And if that's the case, I wish you well and proceed carefully through this life, for you do so at your own peril. Understand this too. If a human life is taken by a werewolf, the life of the possessed is forfeit. From that point on, the destruction of the beast is also the destruction of the man, for the two can only be separated in this process. A silver blade or bullet, although I would scarcely recommend the former, as any hand-to-hand confrontation with this creature would find any man, even a man with prodigious strength, at a great disadvantage. So, take from all of this what you will. Perhaps I will speak more on the issue of lycanthropy, perhaps not. After so many years, I think sometimes it's better to leave it all to the wind and let things exist as they are. But I hope at least now you can understand, or at least begin to understand, why I've always and will continue to regard the existence of werewolves as the devil's curse.
Last night I put a bullet into a man's head. I like to say it was right between the eyes, but I was off a little bit to the left. Now, before anybody gets crazy about what I just said, I need to include one mitigating fact. At the instant that I pulled the trigger, the man was in the form of a werewolf. My name is Owen. Twice before I've spoken to you about my work, particularly concerning the subject of vampires. From time to time, however, my exploits diverge off into other areas. Such was the case here. Last night was the culmination of a 6-month investigation that covered the distance of over 1,000 miles. I tracked the creature from town to town, down deserted highways, across rivers, through isolated forests and desolate swamps. There was a brief but volatile confrontation with the thing in the deep bayou region of Louisiana, where stories of the Rougarou persist till this day. Anyway, in the melee I was thrown to the ground and subsequently lost track of the creature, temporarily. If any of you remember, I spoke about vampires, about them being the result of a specific form of demonic possession. The same is true of the lycanthrope. I talked about how the truth about vampires has been twisted and distorted through the popular media. Well, you might not be surprised that the same thing has happened with respect to werewolves. Of course, I should state right here and for the record that yes, they are real. And yes, as I've said previously, the tetrahedral molecular structure of silver makes it deadly to the werewolf. I once spoke of the high vibratory frequency of silver. That specific frequency is 9.71 times 1015 hertz. Just as the radiating rays of sunlight disrupt the vampiric spirit's ability to maintain possession of a non-living body, so too does silver prohibit the emergence of the malevolent wolf spirit. The creature that I destroyed last night had been responsible for 11 deaths. I was brought into the case through the usual off-the-record communiques with high-ranking law enforcement officials. Each of the deaths were classified as mutilation murders, with all the victims having their throats ripped out as with sharp teeth, and severe lacerations randomly inflicted across the bodies. Aside from these factors, the attacks were all carried out during full moon cycles. It wasn't difficult to assess what I was going up against. But it's over now, at least this one particular case. But I do worry about any potential aftermath to what's happened here. I know about the associated deaths in the case, but what about someone who was attacked and survived? Perhaps you remember the legends? Well, this part of it happens to be true. To survive the bite of a werewolf is to have the mark of the beast placed upon you. And then you too will be a victim of the devil's curse. This is the first time I'm actually sharing this experience with anyone, and it's taken me quite a while to be able to tell it, because ever since it happened, I haven't been the same. I don't sleep as well, have constant nightmares, have been generally getting more ill and just being traumatized. My brother as well, with whom it occurred. Last summer, in July, I was visiting my brother, who happens to live in northern Michigan in a town called Rapid City. The place itself is pretty close to the Traverse State Forest area in which a long road runs through it called Supply Road. This road has thick forests and brush on both sides with occasional farms. We'd gone down south to Fife Lake, which is only about a 30-minute drive from where he lived. He wanted to show me around the area and the lake itself and have some fun with photography. It was about 9 p.m. when we finally decided to call it a day, and it was pretty dark at this point. On the way back, we were both like,
fuck it, let's drive through the Traverse State Forest area for a more scenic route, even though it's out of the way. We both love the woods and going through scenic routes, and I love getting to see new parts of Michigan. As we pulled onto Supply Road, it didn't seem more than 7 or so minutes before we had our experience with whatever the hell it was we saw. Going north on this road, on the left side, is about 10 or so feet of clearing with just dirt and grass before it hits thick brush and trees. It was a little after 9 p.m. at this point, and as we were driving, I'm in the passenger seat, I noticed this large, black-like dog on the side of the road. But something wasn't right. It looked like it was crouched down as a human being would, waiting to jump out or something. It wasn't looking over in our direction, but you could tell its head was absolutely canine-like. As we got closer and the lights actually started to shine on it, it immediately turned its head towards us and stood up as it made this horrible hissing-like sound. I don't know how else to describe it. Both my brother and I turned sheet white at this point. It slammed on our brakes. About 30 feet away from us on the side of the road standing was this, I don't even know what to call it. I want to say werewolf because that's the only thing that really described what it looked like. But then maybe it was a skinwalker. I don't know. This beast had piercing, sharp yellow eyes that for some reason didn't reflect at all when the light hit them. But they almost seemed to glow on their own, which was creepy in and of itself. The thing had a longer snout and very sharp pointed ears and was massively tall. When it hissed at us, you could see how sharp its massive teeth were and how fast it stood up and scared us both as we had startled this thing. The thing honestly looked like something out of a goddamn horror movie, and if CGI actually looked real. We had our windows rolled down all the way home, and we smelled what I can only describe as a mix of garbage, decaying flesh, and wet dog together. We didn't really smell it until after it stood up and we had slammed on our brakes. This damn thing was about 8 or 9 feet tall, I would say, and had a humongous bill. Not bulky per se, but it was big and extremely lean. It looked like an extremely masculine and lean human male body, although I didn't see any genitalia. This thing was very shaggy and hairy, with finger-like claws, like pretty much you'd see in a typical werewolf movie. I didn't get a chance to stare at the feet or anything, as I was motionless staring at this thing. We only got to stare at it for what seemed like a few seconds before it let out this horrible scream that shook me and my brother to the core. It immediately started to pace towards our truck aggressively with its claws baring and teeth baring as if it were extremely aggressive and ready to kill me and my brother. We screamed at the top of our lungs and floored it as hard as we could. He literally sped all the way home, and we didn't say a word the rest of the way. We didn't sleep at all that night, and I haven't been the same person ever since. What I saw that night truly terrified me so badly, and I'm sharing this with people because I hope they can educate themselves and know what's out there, or that it will help someone speak up and share their experience and not worry about ridicule.